Hello, welcome back to Non-Compete. I'm American Johnson, and I'm white, in case you hadn't noticed. And this video is going to be about whiteness and white supremacism, specifically as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. Actually, right before the pandemic really started to break out and ruin everything, I was planning to make a video about whiteness. And so I had been doing a lot of research and studying and reading about the concept of whiteness and white supremacism and the history of whiteness and that sort of thing. And that was something that I was just about to start working on a script for, and then all this happened and it kind of got put on the back burner. But I've been having a lot of experiences related to the pandemic, not just me, but also my partner Luna, who is Vietnamese. She's not white. It's really put a lot of the research I was doing before the pandemic really broke out into a new, fresh, kind of more immediate kind of perspective. So this is just an unscripted video where I'm going to try to lay out some observations and some experiences we've been going through and try to make some sense of what's going on with race as it pertains to COVID-19. Now, having a white person talking about whiteness and racism and that sort of thing, I understand it can be a little dicey. I want to try to be really careful that I'm not speaking on behalf of people of color. I mostly just want to talk about the experiences that I've actually been having myself as a white person, dealing with other white people and watching some of the things that Luna's been going through as well. I wanted to have Luna in this video, but Luna is working on her own video right now, which is going to be an amazing video. It's on the most frequently asked question we get about Vietnam, which is Vietnam socialist? So that video should be coming out around the same time as this one. I'll put a link in the description as soon as it's available. I do recommend you watch it. She's working really, really hard on that video. But Luna and I have been discussing this a lot, and she's going to give the final edit of this her approval. So anything that I say that pertains to Luna, she has sort of signed off on for whatever that's worth. So, okay, so let's begin with the beginning, I guess, of all of this as far as COVID-19 goes and our channels. So the very first time that Luna and I talked about COVID-19 on the internet in video format was on January 26th. When we were doing one of our Breadcasts, which is a weekly live stream series that we do. It's just kind of a casual, fun talk show. And we did not bring it up first, actually. A racist brought it up first.
This is so ridiculous. Yeah.
No, I already banned that person. Okay, so if you want to be like, we can talk about this actually. It's a current event and it affects us.
Hi, Sarah Public. Hi, Retro TV. Hi, hello.
If you want to be a racist fuckhead and say, oh, Luna might have eaten bat soup. And if you don't know why that's a very racist and horrible thing to say, it's because there is a theory going around that it might be the case that COVID-19 made it into the human population by a person in China eating bat soup. Now, of course, Luna is not Chinese. Luna doesn't eat bat soup. And there's a lot of racist sort of undertones and overtones with asking a question like that. It was obviously a troll who was trying to get under her skin and just basically make a racist attack. But that was just kind of the beginning. That was basically the first time we saw firsthand or experienced firsthand that kind of racism and Orientalism as it pertains to COVID-19. Of course, it has become a big deal across the world now at this point, where Asian people are being bullied and attacked and assaulted on the basis of being Asian, typically by white people who are assuming that Asian people are spreading this disease around and that Asian people are disease carriers. This is actually very ironic because here in Vietnam, the vast majority of COVID-19 cases that the government has had to deal with have come from outside of Vietnam. And in fact, the majority of those cases that came from outside of Vietnam have come from Europe and specifically the UK. So white people are actually coming to Asia and spreading it here. So it's very hypocritical and ignorant to be assuming that Asian people are going around spreading COVID-19. This also, of course, relates to Donald Trump calling the disease the China virus, or some people are calling it the Asia virus. That's obviously an attempt to associate the virus with China. Of course, the virus did originate, as far as we know right now, in China, but that doesn't mean that. I mean, diseases can happen anywhere. There's a pretty strong theory that Spanish flu might have first originated in Kansas in the USA, for instance. Diseases spring up anywhere, everywhere, all the time. It's really just a bad luck that it showed up in China. Now, a lot of people are saying that China botched their response to COVID-19. That's a whole other subject, probably for a totally different video. I don't know if I'm ever going to make that video, but I will say that, yeah, initially, China might have not done the best job containing the virus. They might have had problems with transparency and that sort of thing. But at this point, it looks like China has the virus pretty much contained and under control. And now I want to talk about another aspect of racism as it pertains to COVID-19. Now I'm noticing a lot of, especially conservative people in the USA, but not just conservative people, but they seem obsessed with the idea that China is currently, right now, hiding a massive number of COVID-19 infections, and that things are actually much worse in China right now than the government is letting on. In fact, on March 26, just over a week ago, a professor named Steve Hanke shared a video of basically a fight in a hospital lobby and claimed that it was Chinese police forcing a COVID-19 patient out of the hospital because they didn't want to count that patient as having COVID-19. So the allegation is that Chinese police officers are physically picking up COVID-19 patients and throwing them out of the hospital so that they don't have to mark them down as patients in the official records, I guess, the reporting that's being given for the numbers. Now, this is a ridiculous claim. If you watch the video, there are about 5 people who are like physically struggling with this person. I don't know exactly what the struggle is really about, but I can tell you it would make zero sense for 5 Chinese police officers to physically grapple with somebody who is COVID-19 positive and then try to throw them out into the streets so that they can hide the numbers. For one thing, if China wants to hide the numbers, they can just fudge the numbers. They don't have to kick people out into the streets to like hide the numbers. It's a really weird allegation. I don't think it's happening. I think that if China really were having a massive uncontrolled outbreak of COVID-19 right now, by this point, you would have millions of people with the disease, just looking at the way the disease is traveling and spreading. I think that China has done a pretty decent job containing the virus. Maybe their initial reaction was botched. I'm not an expert on China. I'm not in China. But from what I can tell, it seems like they've done a relatively decent job containing the virus, and it would be very difficult. I think there are World Health Organization doctors there. There are other independent doctors in China who are doing their own counts. I know that there's some links between China and the WHO as it pertains to, like the way that WHO talks about Taiwan, that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is, for China to hide hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of cases from the rest of the world, I think that's far-fetched to me. I just don't believe that that's true. I think that the reason people are so obsessed, especially white US Americans, are obsessed with the idea that China is hiding their numbers and actually doing much worse than they are. I think that ties in directly with this concept of whiteness and white supremacism. What I'm basically arguing in this video is that white supremacism is so powerful in places like the United States of America that there are white people who are willing to die and suffer plague rather than admit that some of their claims and beliefs about white supremacism are not as valid as they thought they were. So let me tell you a few more things about what I've been observing that leads me to this conclusion. If you look at the ways that different countries are handling COVID-19 in different parts of the world, and if you look at all the numbers, it's pretty clear to see that Europe and the USA, especially the rich, developed, white-dominated societies in Europe and the USA, are doing the worst job handling the disease. The USA, far and away, I think, is doing the worst job of of any developed country in dealing with COVID-19. I would refer to it as genocidal negligence because there are thousands of people dying unnecessarily in the USA right now. Already at the time of recording, it's almost double the number of people who died on September 11th have died of COVID-19 in the last, I think, month or so. So it's really a major catastrophe that could have been avoided if there were proper planning, if there was a decent healthcare system in the USA, if there was a decent health management response to this crisis, and if the president and the leadership of the USA had taken it more seriously from the beginning. I really do think that the USA stood a strong chance of containing the virus very early on, just the same way that a lot of Asian countries have been able to contain the virus. Now, I've been living in Asia for about 8 years now, so my experience and knowledge of Asia is a lot deeper than my knowledge of, Latin America or Africa or other places that I haven't actually lived in. But specifically, I could say that here in Vietnam, they've been doing an amazing job since the very beginning, taking this very seriously and having a plan and following the plan in such a way that they have saved a lot of lives. And actually, Luna has a great video that I also mirrored on my channel. So if you haven't seen that yet, I'll put a link to that in the description about some of the things that Vietnam has done to deal with COVID-19. But the point is, Vietnam is a small, poor, developing nation. It's not small in terms of population. There are 95 million people here, but they only have about
300,000
hospital beds, and they just don't have a lot of money in this country. It's a developing country, in large part because we bombed them into the Stone Age about 40 years ago and then subjected them to financial warfare for decades. But anyway, the point is they don't have a lot of money in Vietnam. So they've been having to fight this disease in a very cost-effective, bare bones kind of manner, and they've been doing an excellent job. And a lot of these strategies and techniques they've been using, it would be very easy for the USA to adopt them and save a lot of lives. But the USA is not looking to Asia for any kind of leadership or guidance. The USA is trying to do everything basically on our own. And the same is true in a lot of European nations. And I can give you some personal examples of the kind of mindset that I think leads to that arrogance, which is costing people's lives. So the first example I would like to submit is basically self-criticism. It's an example where I was kind of arrogant and probably had some racist, white supremacist ideation that I wasn't even aware I was having. But way back in January, mid-January, when COVID-19 first started to show up on the news and China was really starting to have a big outbreak, and we were starting to see the first couple of cases in Vietnam, because Vietnam had cases very, very early on back in January. Luna was really upset and paying attention to this really carefully and closely. And I actually made fun of her a lot. And I was like, oh, Luna, this isn't such a big deal. She was like on her phone all the time, looking at the news, looking at the numbers, tracking the outbreak. And I thought she was being, basically blowing it out of proportion. And I noticed that, everyone in Vietnam was really taking this very seriously and seeing it as a major threat. And it was all over the news. Everyone was talking about it. And I was watching the USA media and the English language media from Europe, and they were making it seem like COVID-19 wasn't going to be such a big deal. This is before Donald Trump ever even talked about it, really. But I was seeing in the media things like, this is not as deadly as the flu. It's going to blow over. It's not going to be such a big deal. People shouldn't worry about it. So I was trusting that US Eurocentric media more than I was trusting what Luna was telling me, what the Vietnamese media was saying. And I was basically not taking it seriously at all. And I was kind of like laughing at Luna, basically, and just kind of ridiculing and making fun of her a little bit. So looking back on that now, I guess the joke's on me, because Luna saw this coming weeks before anybody that I talked to in Europe or in the USA. And Luna was insistent that we wear masks and wash our hands early on. Who knows? We're in Da Nang where there have been outbreaks. It's very possible that Luna saved my life, because I don't have the best lungs. I don't have the best immune system. So it's very possible that Luna taking this seriously before I did might have even saved my life. We'll never know if that's true or not, but it's very possible that that's the case. The point of the matter is, it's humbling now to realize that I wasn't taking this seriously and I wasn't listening to Luna. And I know that at least in some part, that's because I was trusting that basically Western, European, USA media more than I was trusting the Vietnamese people, including Luna. So, but that's just a small example. There are lots more examples. So when Luna first started to talk about this stuff on her channel and in our broadcasts, one thing that she was talking about a lot is how everyone should wear a mask. And, she was saying this from the very, very beginning. And I could show you, the very first video she made, she talked about wearing masks on her channel. And when we talked about it in broadcast, Luna would bring up the fact that we should all wear masks. And we were getting, specifically Luna was getting a lot of vitriolic, kind of hateful reaction to this idea that people should wear masks. I mean, there were people telling her that, she was like some kind of idiot, and that, doctors in Europe and the USA say that masks aren't necessary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And basically saying that, the idea that we should wear masks to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19 is just ludicrous because these white doctors were saying that masks aren't necessary or useful, or maybe that they're even counterproductive. And unfortunately, these kinds of white supremacist attitudes reared their ugly head in Vietnam. Here's a news report from March 16th, where some white tourists in Vietnam were interviewed. They were refusing to wear masks, even though there was an official advisory from the Vietnamese health officials that everyone in public in Vietnam should be wearing masks. They said things like, "I don't think it's necessary, so I don't wear it. We are white Europeans. Maybe that's why the Vietnamese people think that we carry the virus. Masks make me feel uncomfortable. It only stops the virus from people who already are carrying the virus, but I'm pretty sure that I am not carrying the virus. At first, I felt like I was welcome here, but now we've had some uncomfortable experiences. I called a cab and the driver was unpleasant because I didn't wear a mask. I could only stay quiet and sit in the corner of the cab. I'm not worried that I will get the virus because I'm still young and I have good health." But at least this one white guy was willing to wear the mask and said, "We can't let the virus defeat us." So bravo to you, old white guy in Vietnam. But the rest of these people, it's disappointing that they feel like they're above the law in Vietnam because they are, coming from their superior white cultures, and they're obviously looking down on the culture and the laws of Vietnam. And now we know that they really were putting a lot of people at risk because, again, Vietnam only has 300,000 hospital beds. If there is a major outbreak of COVID-19 in Vietnam, it's going to cost a lot of people their lives. Well, recently we've been seeing that Luna and the people of Vietnam, the Vietnamese health officials who have been advising people to wear masks from the beginning, since January, they were right. And now in the USA, the government is telling people to make masks because we don't have enough masks in the USA. There was no priority given to obtaining masks, and people were being told not to wear or buy masks. So now people are having to go and sew masks. And I'm getting emails right now from people saying that they're sewing masks for their spouses or for their parents who are having to go out into public. And it's really heartbreaking, and the people are like, "I don't know if these masks are working. I don't know if I'm using the right kind of fabric. I've never sewn anything before." So again, it's a situation where people were hateful towards Luna for suggesting that they wear masks because that's what Vietnamese health officials were saying. Now, I was trusting the Vietnamese health officials pretty early on that because I saw pretty quickly that Vietnam, once it really did break out in Vietnam, I saw that the health officials were doing a really good job containing the virus. So I did start wearing a mask early on, and I did start encouraging people to wear masks. But the level of hate and vitriol that I saw Luna receiving for recommending people to wear masks was kind of overwhelming. And again, so you see the situation where Luna talks about COVID-19 back in mid-January. I'm kind of making fun of her and not taking her seriously. Luna recommends that people wear masks. The Vietnamese health officials recommend that people wear masks. And white people all across the world are ridiculing and just being spiteful about the very suggestion that people wear masks. Turns out they were right all along. Nobody wanted to listen to the Asian doctors until it was way, way too late and the virus had broken out and spread all throughout the USA and most of Europe. Now, I made a tweet on March 6th, and this was right around the time when the US media was really starting to finally recognize and talk about COVID-19. And I think people were really antsy and not knowing what to anticipate at that point. Hard to really think about the fact that this was less than a month ago. This has been the longest month of my life. I don't know about you, but these weeks are just dragging by really, really slowly for me. But yeah, on March 6th, I made a tweet and I talked about how Vietnam was at that time the first country to fully contain COVID-19, and that the World Health Organization was looking at what Vietnam was doing and learning from the protocols that they had in place. And I was basically urging people to please pay attention to what Vietnam was doing. And I got so many messages from white supremacist jerks on Twitter saying that, you know, Vietnam was just doing emergency response theater, and that Vietnam really wasn't doing that amazing of a job, and that the real reason that this virus wasn't spreading in Vietnam was because of the heat and humidity. We talked about that in the video that we did together as a collaboration, Luna and I. But basically, it's all BS. You know, it's being proven. If you look at other countries in the region, whether they're Thailand, Singapore, you can look at India, the virus is spreading fast in places that are hot and humid. And Vietnam's ability to keep the virus contained down to about, at this point, less than 250 cases. And again, the vast majority of those cases came from outside of Vietnam. That's remarkable. There have been 0 deaths in Vietnam. So since March 6th, I've been urging people to look at what Vietnam is doing, follow Vietnam's example, and beg the leaders in the USA and Europe to examine the Vietnamese model and the protocols and the procedures that Vietnam is doing to fight this disease and follow them. And I'm getting told by people that, you know, oh, this is all BS. It's just the heat and the humidity. Vietnam's not doing anything remarkable, and just basically dismissing Vietnam. There's a few reasons for that. Part of that might be because Vietnam is a socialist country. If you don't agree with me on that, go watch Luna's video that's launching right now. Again, link in the description. But regardless, you know, there's this kind of anti-socialist sentiment, I think, but I think a lot of it also has to do with white supremacism. So let's go back and talk again about the way that people are reacting to the situation in the US as it pertains to China. I'm noticing that there's this obsession with the idea that China is hiding their numbers. And people seem to be more concerned with the idea that China is hiding their numbers and that things are actually really terrible in China than they are with the fact that things are completely bleak and miserable and really getting dark in the USA right now. And I think that there's a really strong reason that people want to talk about China's failings, be they real or be they fictitious. They want to talk about China's failings a lot more than they want to talk about the failings of the USA and Europe. Remember, the idea of white supremacism, it revolves around the idea that white culture and white society and the white race are superior to other races and other cultures. So if you have a major global historic pandemic and these white societies, these white cultures are dealing with it much more poorly than people of color in Asia and other parts of the world, that shakes the very foundations of white supremacism. And so it's a lot easier, I think, for a lot of white people to process the idea that China's hiding numbers and China's miserably failing. That's what they're going to want to focus on, because they're not going to want to think about or address the fact that the USA is failing so hard right now when it comes to COVID-19. So white people just don't want to think about it. They don't want to address the fact that countries in Asia and other non-white countries are doing a much better job here, because it invalidates the very concept of whiteness. And now let's talk a little bit about what whiteness really is. Whiteness, you know, to be white is not to be a race. You know, there's no race that is white people. To be white is not a cultural identity. There's no white culture. As much as people want to, as much as white people want to believe that there is a white culture, there is no such thing as white culture. You know, there's no like white region where the white people come from, and then, you know, they're the white race. And if you check their DNA, you'll see that they're white. The whole idea of whiteness is a pretty new concept, and it has everything to do with exclusion and supremacism. So basically, to be white is to be part of a group that benefits from being white. And, you know, whiteness has evolved and changed over the years. There was a time when certain people who are now considered white were not considered white. So for instance, you know, in the past, Italian and Irish people were not considered white people. And there are people today who are sometimes considered white and sometimes not, depending on when it might benefit whiteness. So if you look at a lot of Jewish people, they might be considered white when it suits whiteness. A great example of that is whenever Pete Buttigieg exclaimed that there were 7 white people on stage talking about racism. basically indicating that Bernie Sanders is white during the South Carolina primary debate way back in February. And again, just over a month ago, really hard to believe that we were even talking about Pete Buttigieg over a month ago, just about a month ago. That seems like so long ago. But anyway, yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders can be considered white when it benefits Pete Buttigieg to call him white. But then on the other hand, there are plenty of white supremacists that will not consider Jewish people to be white when that suits whiteness. Obviously, the most grim example of that would be like the Holocaust. But, there are obviously more contemporary examples of Jewish people being subject to racism and exclusion from white spaces and that sort of thing. So Jewish people are sometimes white and sometimes not, depending on what is most convenient and suitable to whiteness, to the majority of white people at the time, at any given time. So there are, whiteness is basically a social construct that is used to benefit white people. So the whole point of whiteness is to benefit white people. And that's why white identity is so caught up with this supremacist ideation. To be white is to stand above people who are non-white. And anytime that's challenged, that social structure is challenged in any way, it's very invalidating for a lot of people who are, really concerned with upholding their white identity and their white pride. So whenever those foundations of white supremacy are shaken, and whenever whiteness as a construct is challenged, and the idea of white supremacism is challenged, it's very difficult, I think, for a lot of white people to process that. And I know that, when I first started learning about these ideas of whiteness as a white person, I felt a lot of defensive sort of mechanisms kicking in, and I was resistant to these ideas early on. And so that's why I think it comes as no surprise that we see so many white people who are so obsessed with trying to focus on the negative aspects of how China might have failed, rather than looking right in their own backyard at the way that our own societies are failing. The USA is not doing a good job right now. The USA is failing miserably right now. And the USA is a white-dominated society. The people at the top of our society, the President of the United States, most of the people in Congress, most of the people who control corporations, most capitalists, most of these people are white, and they are failing to protect the people of the United States. Looking at Europe, the birthplace of whiteness, according to white supremacists, and you see these countries that have been held up as like the birthplace of truly modern civilization, France and the UK and Germany and all of these, incredible cradles of civilization are failing to contain this virus, especially when compared to, countries like Vietnam. It's very difficult, I think, for white people to stomach this fact that we're not nearly as superior as we have been trying to build ourselves up as for so long. And it's costing people lives. Because right now, what Europe and what the USA, what all of these white leaders need to do is admit that they don't know what they're doing right now, and admit that they need help, and go to places like Vietnam and Taiwan, and even China, and ask for help and advice and supplies. Vietnam is handing out supplies right now all over the world, including to Europe. They've sent shipments of medicine and masks and supplies to Italy and to other places that are struggling with this disease. But you don't really see that get talked about in the corporate US mainstream media. There are definitely ways that Vietnamese officials could counsel the USA to show us how to contain this outbreak in the USA. But that's going to take some humility, and it's going to be hard, I think, for white people to do that. And it's sickening and sad to me, because here we are, Luna and I, especially Luna, has been trying for weeks now, months, ever since January, Luna's been talking about this, and trying to get people in these white-dominated societies to look at what Vietnam is doing and try to learn from them. you know, and I mean, it's really incredible what Vietnam has been able to do. With a very small budget, they've been able to maintain less than 250 cases, most of those coming from outside of the country, 0 deaths. They're doing a remarkable job. Why is this being ignored? Yeah, there are some stories here and there, mostly in smaller journalistic websites and that sort of thing. You're not really seeing a lot of coverage in CNN and MSNBC or Huffington Post. You're mostly seeing it in these smaller websites. There's a lot of attempts to undermine the successes of places like Vietnam and China and you know, other places in Asia. And you know, it's dangerous because people are dying right now. And right now what we need to be doing is focusing on what actually works. Focus on policies and procedures and treatments that work. And we need to be looking at the places where containment is the most pronounced, where containment is actually succeeding. And we need to learn from those people. And it's going to be hard to do that. It's going to be probably impossible to get Donald Trump to admit that he doesn't know what he's doing, that his administration is failing, and that there are places like Vietnam and other parts of Asia that we can learn from and get support from and get guidance from. The USA, you know, most Americans, we're used to being the people who go out and help the rest of the world. That's the way that our propaganda has functioned for a long, long time. There's this idea that we go out and we save poor developing countries with our, you know, billionaire philanthropists and our NGOs. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of that is smoke and mirrors, and you know, there's really not as much structure beneath that facade as it may appear, as we're seeing right now. It's time for some humility. It's time for us to start chipping away at whiteness and working towards abolishing whiteness. The only way to do that is for white people to recognize whiteness for what it is. It is a social structure that exists to exclude the non-white and to benefit the white. That's not to say that there are not white people who suffer. That's not to say that there are not poor white people. There are white people who are, you know, poor, in poverty, starving, homeless. Of course. I'm not saying that white people don't have any problems, and I'm not saying that every white person is just like this completely privileged person dancing through life without a care in the world. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point is that whiteness in itself is a social construct that needs to be dismantled. You know, there is no white race. White people are not superior to other people. It's just a social construct that divides us and elevates one group of people over the rest of the world. And now we can see that the ideas of white supremacism, it's a paper tiger. There are no teeth to this idea. We are not the superior civilization of the world. We can see it right now. It's time to read the writing on the wall and recognize that we are there is no such thing as the superior white race. So I don't really know what my thesis statement is here. I guess it's just absurd and it's sad to see white people who are more concerned with propping up their white supremacist beliefs and more concerned with, I guess, soothing their own white fragility than they are with waking up and really taking this problem of pandemic and really addressing it and admitting that's going to mean following the lead of other countries that might not be white-dominated societies. I mean, I'm glad that finally we're starting to take the advice about masks seriously. I hope that this will be followed by adopting other policies coming out of Vietnam and Taiwan and other places where the disease has been contained. But it's really scary to me. I haven't talked about this at all on this channel yet, but right now I'm basically stuck here in Vietnam. There are no flights or buses or trains leaving the country. There's no way for me to get back to the United States right now. My family is, you know, in South Carolina. I have immediate family members who are having to work right now, and I'm worried about them. I'm worried about my parents. You know, they're getting older, and there's no way for me to be with them right now, and that is stressful to me. And it's upsetting. And the idea that something could happen to the people that I care about because, you know, white people in the USA are too stubborn and prideful and racist to admit that there are places in the world that are doing a better job than we are and to learn from those people. it really upsets me. And so I hope that we, as white people, can do a better job recognizing whiteness for what it is and working to dismantle it. And it's not the sort of thing where I can say, oh, well, I don't believe in whiteness. I think that it's a social construct, and therefore I'm not going to be white anymore. I can't do that. As long as whiteness exists and I benefit from whiteness, I will have to continue being a white person. The only way for us to abolish whiteness once and for all is for all of us to understand and come to terms with what whiteness is. Only then can we, as white people, dismantle this social construct and move forward, with the rest of humanity, and hopefully build a much better, safer world for all of us. Certainly, the world we're in right now is an unsafe place for a lot of people, and now we can see that white supremacism doesn't just hurt and kill people of color. It's also now causing the deaths of hundreds, thousands of white people because of the arrogance, because of the refusal to admit some humility and to look to these other countries for guidance. I hope that we can do better. I hope that, if we could somehow get Donald Trump to do what needs to be done to actually start addressing COVID-19 in a meaningful way, that would be wonderful. If we could replace Bernie Sanders with somebody who would do a better job, that would be wonderful as well. I don't know. I don't know what the solutions are right now. I will talk about really quickly one possible solution, and that is direct action. I believe very strongly in the ideas of acting directly and not just waiting and relying on our leaders to save us. Sometimes we have to take matters into our own hands. That's the anarchistic principle of direct action. And right now, I think that we have a lot of power in striking, whether it's labor striking, rent striking, or debt striking. That's why a lot of other leftists and myself are working together to start an organization at genstrike.org. We also go by General Strike 2020. And what we're doing is we're finding working people across the USA and around the world who want to do more, but they don't know where to begin. Maybe you are struggling and you don't know how to organize your workplace. You don't know how to organize a tenants union. You don't know how to go about participating in a debt strike. Well, we're here to help you get organized. So if you go to genstrike.org and you contact us, let us know your situation and how we can help you. Don't dox yourself. Don't give us too much personal identifying information. Just give us the basic, story of where you are right now and how we can help you. Or if you want to help out as a volunteer, we could definitely use more people helping out. So you can go to genstrike.org and we can start taking direct action and putting pressure on landlords and capitalists and politicians to do the work that needs to be done to save lives. This COVID-19 thing really has me and Luna upset. We're really taking it seriously. Our channels are probably gonna be focusing on it quite a bit in the weeks to come. I hope you don't get bored with it. This is just, it's historic. What we're going through right now, it's going to change our society in very deep, meaningful ways. And the decisions we make in the weeks to come, I believe, are going to make or break us as a species, as a global civilization. And I think we're at a crossroads right now. And the decisions that we make are going to determine whether or not we plunge into climate destruction and fascism, or we elevate ourselves to something greater, beyond, that goes beyond capitalism and that goes beyond all these forms of exploitation and, yes, racism. And I believe that if we work together right now and we try to organize and build these movements in the USA and around the world, we can change the world right now. We can save the world, but we have to start working right now. We have to start organizing. So that's what genstrike.org is all about. And I guess I'm going to end the video now. I'm American Johnson. This is Non-Compete. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next week. Take care of each other. I want to give an extra special, super duper special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters this month. I absolutely know that a lot of you are struggling right now with your finances. So if you have to end your Patreon subscription, or if you already have, that is absolutely 100% okay with me. We understand. If you are still supporting us, we thank you for that. These are tough times for everybody. So we appreciate the support, but we just also want to make it really clear that we understand if you can't support us right now. So We've gotten a few apology letters from people saying, you know, that they aren't working right now and they don't have a very stable finances right now. That's fine. You do not have to apologize. You don't have to explain yourself, but we just wanted to make that really clear. Yeah, that's it. Join genstrike.org. If you need help, we can help you. If you want to help, that's a great place to spend some time counseling and advising individuals and building mutual aid networks. It's a cool thing. So genstrike.org one last time. We'll see you next week.
Because Wonder Soft Whipped bread is made from batter, not dough. It has no holes. Get Wonder Soft Whipped.